My film I picked was Dog Soldiers, which is a film set in the Scottish Highlands and has to do with werewolves. It's kind of like the American film Predator, but with werewolves instead. The movie starts out with a group of SAS soldiers on a training mission, wanting to meet up with a special ops group who are supposed to be like the best of the best, but finds them all dead except from one. Then slowly a few of them start dying, and they're forced to take refuge in the house of a zoologist who tells them that the deaths were caused by werewolves. Then it goes into detail about the various masculinity of the soldiers and how it's detrimental to them as they're slowly picked off until only one's left alive and is forced to reconcile his masculinity within the framework of a group of soldiers and move on from there. It's left ambiguous at the end.
Thanks, Jock. Yeah, so I thought this movie was pretty good. Like, I'm a big fan of horror movies, and I thought this movie had some good scares. It was also quite funny. Found the dialogue overly machismo and macho, like the sort of banter between the different soldiers was quite silly. But I loved the werewolf design. I thought it was quite scary. It's kind of like these wolf creatures, but they have these really long limbs, and they're quite tall. It's quite an alien shape. I like that you don't really see them much until towards the end of the film. Like, you just see like bits and pieces, like claws and teeth, but then you'll just see a flash of the outline of the monster, and it's quite effective and quite scary. And I also really like the practical effects, the fact that these werewolves are actually costumes. They use like real blood and gore, and the blood and gore is actually quite extreme. There's not a lot of it, but there's several moments where there's like really, really graphic sort of beheadings and tearing of bodies. Are you a fan of horror movies?
I do.
Glenn?
Yep. I do really like horror movies. You know, some of the classics like Friday the 13th, Halloween. I like the Saw films.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because I was trying to think of other movies that this movie reminded me of, because it is ostensibly a horror movie, but there's a lot of action in it as well. Like you mentioned, Predator. It's very similar to Predator. Another film I'd sort of compare it to is Night of the Living Dead in terms of the sort of
that's good.
It's got like a farmhouse setting where most of the characters are hiding out for most of the film, and then they're trying to board it up and stop the werewolves from coming in, which is cool.
A bit like John Carpenter's a thing in terms of the isolation and the special effects.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that isolation creates a lot of tension and infighting within the house, because they're all stressed out about this external threat and they end up sort of turning on each other. And there's sort of this traitor potentially in their ranks. And the fact that the werewolves can like turn them into werewolves, so they can be bitten and then turn into werewolves the way a zombie would turn into a zombie if it was bitten. And the characters hide their injuries sometimes and things like that. So it has a bit of mystery and suspense to it in that regard. I really liked the Scottish Highland settings. I liked how it sort of connected to sort of supernatural folklore of werewolves and monsters, and the fact that the Scottish Highlands are often associated with these kind of wild or sort of unknown entities like that. Like, there's obviously a rich tradition of folklore and Celtic culture and all that. So I thought that was a nice touch that sort of located it specifically in Scotland.
Oh, one thing that reminds me of is The Wicker Man, if either of you have seen that.
Yeah, I feel like that's the miss. We hadn't chosen The Wicker Man, but I feel like that's one of the big gaps in our roundtable today. So hopefully, if we do another Scottish roundtable at some point, I'd love to talk about The Wicker Man, because that's a great Scottish horror film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I also think it's sort of a mix of British and Scottish characters among the soldiers. Like Kevin McKidd is the main character, and he's Scottish, but a lot of the other characters seem to be English. So I kind of like the idea of English characters coming to the Highlands and being terrified of what might be in there, and sort of linking the wild Scot enemy to these kinds of monstrous figures that might have haunted the English soldiers, back during the medieval wars and things like that. Similar to, I guess, the way that the Northmen are depicted as kind of these evil, monstrous wolf creatures in A Song of Ice and Fire to the southern kingdoms. Is there any other movies you'd liken it to, Jock?
the main ones I saw were the Predator and the Thing, but I also
Yeah.
get your point in which is the likes of the Wicker Man as well.
Yeah. I was trying to think of like underlying themes or messages that the film might had, but I couldn't really. Most of the film just seemed to be about the action and the sort of joy of this battle between soldiers and werewolves. But did you think there's anything deeper or any sort of subtext going on beneath the surface of the film?
Well, I thought like soldier masculinity was like the main theme, and it was about the main character developing to move past masculinity and macho as the main driving force in his actions.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I guess, yeah, as we were saying, they are quite macho characters, and they're all sort of puffing up their chests at each other and trying to have verbal sort of and physical showdowns with each other before they agree to work together. And I guess maybe, yeah, that's reflected in the intense aggression of the werewolves themselves. It's like these macho men that have finally met their match and have to think of other ways to defeat their enemy. I did want to point out that the director, Neil Marshall, film, this is his debut film, but he made another film called The Descent, which I would highly recommend, which I think is set in England. But that's one of my favorite horror movies, a very claustrophobic movie about a bunch of cave divers going into a cave and finding something scary down there. And Marshall also directed several quite prominent episodes of Game of Thrones, like he directed Blackwater and The Watchers on the Wall. So he's quite a prestigious sort of action director in film and television.
I think that's one of the reasons they picked Dog Soldiers for this.
Yeah, for sure. I was trying to think of other werewolf films that I really enjoy, and I can't actually think of any. Because I could think of great Underworld, yeah. Because I can think of like really scary vampire movies and zombie movies. Most of the werewolf movies I can think of are more like action movies, like Underworld or this. Yeah, I'll keep searching for a good one.